Hello and welcome to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, is our most ambitious project yet. Our plan is to look at the state of the comic book industry during a particular year, and then to examine in detail the major ways that Marvel Comics in particular evolved during that year. We'll look at who was creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics either debuted or ended. After that, we'll get down to business, take out our stack of Daredevil comics, and look at what our old friend, the Man Without Fear, was up to during that same time. We're glad you've joined us.
Welcome everybody to the second half of 1990. We finished up on comics and the state of Marvel in 1990 last week, and now we want to talk about our very favorite character, Daredevil, who is the subject of this week's analysis. Dwayne, tell us, what was going on with Daredevil in 1990?
So there was a lot going on, and the interesting thing, just starting out, first appearances are just starting out talking about the appearances in general. It seems like he sort of exploded this year. As far as we have the main Daredevil run, which is issues 276 to 287, but he also appeared in a number of other places. Wolverine 21, Captain America 368 and 374 through 376, a book called Count Duckula, number 10. He was in the Punisher magazine, issues number 8, 15, and 16. He was a part of What If, issues 13, 15, 17, and 20. He was in Marvel Comics Presents number 49, and in 2 graphic novels, Daredevil Marked for Death and Elektra Lives Again. So he was everywhere this year, and like more so than ever, it would have been hard to catch all of his appearances through in the Marvel universe this year. So we're not even going to try. We're gonna focus on the main Daredevil run this year, which was written by Nocenti again for the third year in a row. So a very consistent writer again this year. We start to see some differences with regards to the art. John Romita Jr. started out the year 276, came back for 4 issues a little bit later on, 278 to 282. But we also had Rick Leonardi, Mark Bagley, Lee Weeks, and Greg Capullo all doing art on Daredevil this year. Al Williamson, who got the award for Best Inker, did most of the year, all but 2 issues, and even one of the 2 issues he had a partial credit on. So outside of issue 286, Al Williamson was the guy doing inks across this year. So for the most part, we had a very consistent, creative team through the year, and it showed. There was a very strong throughput line this year that pretty much continues where we ended last year. And if you remember where we ended last year, we had that special bonus issue in December, the Acts of Vengeance, where Doctor Doom rebuilt Ultron with the idea to take down Daredevil. And as the year begins, the Act of Vengeance event continues with Ultron supposed to be taking down Daredevil, but instead actually looks to take number 9 as a bride, and Daredevil must try to save her, which by the end of the issue he does. And it's really interesting because then that's kind of the end of the Acts of Vengeance with regards to this run of, within the Daredevil run. I don't know if there was a larger kind of culmination and ending to that event. Dan, do you have any idea?
Not really, but it kind of blends in, because even as sort of Ultron is going away, Mephisto will see as sort of melding in, and the whole number 9 thing continues and everything. A lot of the same characters who've came in. But yes, I believe that is, for all intents and purposes, when Ultron gets essentially Daredevil whacks Ultron's head off with a club, which because they've weakened the non adamantium cabling enough for whatever that they can do this. It seems a little crazy to me that you'd build an adamantium robot and then connect him in ways that you could just take his head off with a club by whacking it repeatedly. But you know, that's comics for you, man. So, anyways, yeah, I think that is the end for now, and then we have that weirdness of the other thing that's weird is Nine did pick up Ultron's head and was like, "I'll rebuild you, my friend. Your head is still warm," or whatever. But we don't see her carrying the head around the rest of the issues that they're doing stuff. So she's done something with it.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but yeah, I think that's the end of the X Vengeance.
She just seemed almost partially interested in being Ultron's bride, and then was kind of a little upset that Daredevil took the head off, and so it was a little weird. But and then more weirdness, because next we get an out of timeline story, not drawn by John Romita Jr. This one was Rick Leonardi, involved Daredevil and a psychiatrist whose star patient was his wife. And it was very much just a real self-contained issue. The psychologist was very much about, my wife is sort of crazy and I'm writing papers on her and all this sort of thing. And by the end, he realizes, hey, I should probably treat her less as a subject for some papers and as a curiosity for my psychology, and more of, my wife. And thanks, Daredevil. Thanks for helping me realize that.
And Daredevil essentially is not in costume this entire issue.
No, he's Matt Murdock.
He essentially even does some semi-superheroic things like getting her out of the way of traffic and stuff like that. But he does it all just essentially as himself, just as a guy jumping in front of a car to save her and stuff like this. And this is essentially resolved with no punches thrown. He doesn't beat up the psychologist and anything like that to make him realize he just sort of goes, dude, you really got to stop this. And the guy's like, yeah, you're right. And then he burns all of his notepaper and says, we'll get you a real doctor, honey. And then Murdock just sort of wanders away. It is a completely mundane story in almost all ways.
Right.
So it's also, I think, one of my favorite stories we've read in the last year or two of Daredevil. Rick Leonardi's art with Williamson on it is just sublimely beautiful. Like the first page is a full page spread of the woman in like an art gallery and the like, and it's just fantastic. And everything from there, Leonardi's also always had this just really sort of beautiful, almost stretched sort of art where everybody is really long and elegant and the like. And Williamson does a brilliant job with it. The story it's kind of interesting, to see one of those resolutions not through violence that you just don't get in comics very often,
No, it was definitely a good story. It just sort of kind of the shock and awe of it being right smack dab in the middle of everything else that was going on. That was, this is in New York City. This is pre everything that basically had happened the latter half of 1989. And, he's not in costume. There's no violence. There's just, he's trying to be the woman's friend. He goes to dinner, realizes the husband is doing this, and is like spending the whole issue trying to explain that, heck, part of the reason she's as bad as she is because of what you're doing and you need to stop. And then by the end, he actually realizes it, which is good. But at the same time, it's just sort of a little jarring given everything that's sort of happened over the last year with Daredevil. And then we immediately go back to the current timeline in the very next issue. If you read the other piece, kind of pre-Acts of Vengeance, we had the Inhumans that had come down from Atlantean. I forgot how to say it.
Attilan.
Attilan. and they're like looking for Black Bolt's son. So they set out to go to Pottersville to search for the son, and it turns into a road trip for them, Daredevil, Number 9, and Brandy, who was the daughter of the guy that was running the farm that Number 9 was being, experimented on, and was the bad just the bad guy, basically.
Bad guy.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we have Blackheart and Mephisto discussing the finer points of evil, and Blackheart is being tasked with making Daredevil and the others do evil. So on this road trip, you've got, the Inhumans are fighting with each other, and like they're all hitting on Number 9, and it's just, it's kind of weird. It's sort of crazy.
Well, and it's because the weird created son of Mephisto or whatever hides as this little nebbish guy that they pick up in the car, and then he foments discontent and jealousy because he's able to somehow activate those base emotions in people. So he makes Karnak, one of the Inhumans, really sort of jealous, and then suddenly the fights break out and there's all sorts of problems. And yeah, it is weird though. Like this whole thing is almost like half dream sequence, and then I'll let you get to it, but relatively soon some other crazy stuff happens, and this was sort of the appetizer to craziness, because it gets even crazier. So they get to Pottersville, the team finds a boy. The boy's name is Pope, with powers, who the town is completely scared of. He kills a goat just by looking at it, basically. And so they want to kill him. They have the vigilante, pitchforks and torches, the whole 9 yards. And right as they're about ready to basically hang the kid, the Inhumans, Daredevil, Number 9, all of them show up. They save the boy. And then as they're leaving town, there's a crack in the earth caused by an earthquake, and they all fall in. And then what we see is Daredevil and his companions experience different versions of hell before a final showdown with Mephisto, in which they are aided by the Silver Surfer. It is, as crazy as it sounds, it was even crazier to look at, because we had John Romita Jr. come back for these books, and it was just bonkers art. It was just, I don't even, the things that were going on, the Karnak and Gargan were naked, walking around. You had Daredevil fighting like thousands of demons. You had Brandy and Number 9 that are like scaling what they think is the cliff to get back up onto Earth. And then they like rescue some guy about halfway up and are like carrying him, or he's carrying Brandy
them.
And Pope. Brandy and Pope.
Okay. Yeah. So it was crazy, but like the art is just kinetically crazy throughout all of these. No matter who you were looking at, it was just like, it seemed like there was something almost unexplainable on every single page.
No, that and the art was, so there's that point where Daredevil actually, before he fights the demons, he's actually like wandering through the snow and whatever, and he finds a couple crucifixes and manages to like Boy Scout them together to make fire.
Yeah.
And we've been given a monologue earlier that tells us that the only one allowed to make fire in hell is Mephisto. So when he makes fire, Mephisto's like, who's making hellfire that is not me? Yeah. And then he sends all of the demons after him. So and I love the first page of one of the books when they're down there, where it's just sort of Daredevil with his torch against this white background. Just beautiful Romita art. Also, one note on the townsfolk. You did misspeak, because you said that they showed up and saved the boy from the townsfolk. The kid is Black Bolt's son, and he actually does have a death stare. So all he has to do is stare at someone to kill them. So in actual fact, they showed up and saved the townsfolk from the boy.
Probably, yeah. I mean, probably
Who would have turned them all into
really...
dead goats if they'd have given him too much trouble. So.
I was going to say, he didn't seem like he really understood what he was doing. And so I don't know if he necessarily would have known to do that. It just may have happened as a result of him being scared, potentially, if they actually did start to try and go through with it. But yeah.
I do not believe he intended to kill the goat, but he looked at it too intently and then it died. Yes. So, yeah. So he is an extremely powerful child that they are wandering around. And in fact, is the reason the Inhumans are in the story is the kid's plane had crashed somewhere on Earth, and they were sent to find him. And so he is sort of what they're after.
Yes. Yeah, he's the whole reason they're there. So after this giant battle with Mephisto, we get another single story, which, I don't know, to me feels like it's an out of timeline story, because I mean, he's outside of New York, but it just doesn't feel like it fits given where we are at in this story. The story is Captain America and Daredevil are trying to help an inventor whose fantastic invention could change the world. And so this is a social justice sort of issue that we're going to actually use as the spotlight book for this week. So we're going to talk more about this in great detail here shortly. But
I like it.
As far as timeline goes, this didn't make a lot of sense to me, because he has just done this giant battle in hell with Mephisto, and then suddenly the very next book he's in this random town somewhere and he's with Captain America.
Yeah, I think this is the book though where we'll talk about it, but I think this is his transition. This is where he realizes it's time he needs to get back to where he needs to be.
Yes. The next issue, Daredevil finally returns to New York, but his memories are scrambled by his recent trip to hell, and so not knowing who he really is, he assumes the identity of Jack Murdock. And if that name sounds familiar, that's because that's his father's name. So meanwhile, Bullseye finds out about the confusion with Matt Murdock, or Jack Murdock, and decides to take advantage of the situation by impersonating our horned hero. So you have Bullseye, dressed up as Daredevil, going around doing not so Daredevil-ish of things, and you have Matt Murdock saying he's Jack Murdock, kind of just wandering around town. And the rest of the year, we see Matt Murdock meet a homeless woman named Nyla, who takes him in, and the two become close. Murdock then becomes a boxer. Excuse me. Let me try that again. Murdock then becomes a boxer, just like his father at Fogswell's gym, and Bullseye continues stealing from the rich and beating up police to ruin the reputation of the once great hero. Ben Urich returns in the books, and he seems to realize pretty quickly that things don't really add up the way they should, and he goes looking for the real Matt Murdock. And in the final panels of the year, we see Wilson Fisk at a Jack Murdock boxing match, and he too recognizes his former adversary and seems to be putting together, hatching a plan, as it were, to maybe to get at his old adversary. So it was really kind of a strange year for Matt Murdock. The year kind of starting outside of New York, the trip to hell, and that whole big story arc. And then, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, it took me almost that entire latter half of the year. I almost had to read every single issue until I truly understood what was going on, and that the guy that was pretending to be Daredevil was in fact Bullseye, because they sort of was like, who is this man in black? And that was Matt Murdock. And then it's like, well, then who's the guy in the Daredevil costume? And I don't know if I just missed a couple panels or something, but it didn't make sense. And it literally did. It's like, why is he stealing from the rich? Why is he like bringing this woman and like having his way with her up in this random like apartment and all this sort of thing? And it's like,
because that would have surprised you about Matt Murdock if you'd have just...
Yeah, it was just kind of really weird. It didn't make much sense to me.
Hold on, Matt Murdock is hooking up in another part of town with another woman at the very time.
Yes,
you're being surprised.
I should be surprised. I shouldn't be, probably, but you know, it's so weird.
So when did you actually? When did you realize it was?
I think it was actually the last issue. I think it was. There was an exchange between Bullseye and Kingpin, where he kind of then it sort of explained that that's what he's doing, and then it's like, oh, okay, that explains why none of this behavior makes sense. Yep. And it just...
during the whole lead up to it, Bullseye has not been in his costume at all,
right?
And he has been like just sort of wandering around either as a regular guy or as Daredevil. But there have been a number of times where either he does Bullseye-ish sort of using various things as weapons to take out guards or whatever, or it's weird, but the artists, when they drew his grin and stuff, he had sort of this maniacal kind of look.
Yes,
every once in a while
he did have that
looked Bullseye-ish. So it was interesting because they didn't at all tell you it was Bullseye. But especially once you know what to look for, you're like, oh yeah, that was Bullseye. And it's been Bullseye since the very first time we saw him. But it takes a little while because they sort of let it build and burn. And I think Bullseye's supposed to be dead right now, which is why it also gets to burn a little bit more. Because didn't he get killed last time we saw him? Or did he get resurrected after he... He's been killed and resurrected a number of times, including at least once this year in Elektra Lives Again. So it happens all the time. So, because they brought him back and then they killed him again in that story.
Oh, okay. So, there you go. Yeah.
So it's a closed loop, but still.
Right. So I mean, I don't know what to make of these because like they're like the story I think is kind of interesting, especially the latter half of the year. It just, because it didn't make sense for so long, I'm just sort of stuck with the idea of, wow, this didn't make sense for so long. I'm still kind of, even though I know what's going on, it still doesn't quite hit for me.
Yeah, and the other thing is that the reason why Daredevil's having all the problems almost is that it's almost like his mind is unable to deal with the trauma of having been in hell. Yes. And so he's trying to almost convince himself that everything that happened to him was a dream, and that at a certain point reality and dreams start mixing together. And at first he knows who he is, and then he just sort of seems to lose it. It is actually really confusing how he somehow ended up not knowing who he is. But it seems like he got dizzy and then he got beat up by a bunch of kids. And when he was done getting beaten up, then he couldn't remember who he was anymore.
The also that first book when he's back in New York, there's kind of this full page panel with him kind of standing in front of New York, and there's a bunch of explanation boxes that sort of tell you he doesn't really know who he is, but like you're not really given an idea of why and like you're just supposed to like, okay, he doesn't really know who he is, and then you're just supposed to kind of go ahead with that premise, and I think that would have been fine, except then you have the Bullseye thing going on with him pretending to be Daredevil at the same time. And you don't really get told that that's going on as well, not directly anyway, or at least it didn't feel like it. And you just sort of like, it's like two kind of crazy things that don't make a lot of sense individually, and then they're kind of pushed together across this story arc, and it was tough to get my head around.
No, I agree. I think that it's an interesting story once you just accept it. But
Yeah.
I do think it was disorienting in that it didn't necessarily all make sense exactly why we were there. I liked the story. I liked the way he sort of gets found by the homeless woman, and then she starts taking care of him, but then wants him to be a thief. So, dragging him into that world, which turns out Daredevil would be a really, really good thief if he decided he wanted to be.
Yeah. He in one of their he picks a somebody's got a safe. Turns out, when you've got super sensitive hearing, you can hear tumblers and could very easily open a safe without much issue.
Yeah.
So I don't have that listed under his new powers, but I probably should have, actually.
Safe cracking. So, yeah. No, I like the story, and in actual fact, keep in mind that as of the end of 1990, this story is still going on.
Yes.
Right? So, as of the last book we're talking about this year, he is still thinking he's Jack Murdock and wandering around the city. His friends are starting to take care of him. There's a few important other things going on, like Foggy. I don't know, are you talking about this? But Foggy has actually cleared all of his legal problems. So
he's working on them at least.
Yep.
He's trying to get. I don't think he's exactly cleared them all up, but he's working towards getting Matt Murdock's license, lawyer license back.
Yep. And so one of the things we see is that while Murdock's been gone, in the background, he's got people still, Foggy's angry at him, but even as he's angry at him and disillusioned, he is also kind of picking through, and he's like, I found out that all of this was a big setup, and I've been able to prove this and prove that. And so he's getting Matt's life, or at least the potential for his life, put back, which we're going to see kind of bring to fruition in just a little while here. And then also, you've got people like, over at the Bugle, Jameson, as always, is like, yep, told you Daredevil sucks. All of these superheroes are the worst. We're going to run headlines. And then Urich's like, well, come on. This is not, we know better than this. And he's like, nope, I hate superheroes. I'm going to run it anyways. So Urich does do his own sort of, op-ed talking about how he doesn't think this is really Daredevil and they should give him another chance. And that's kind of where the year ends, is the people of New York going, Daredevil, we know you're not actually a bad guy, even though we're seeing it. And Bullseye's just like, what does it take to get these people to finally give up on this guy? So I suspect we're going to find out in the near future. So.
All right. So as far as the news this year, new powers, toys, and places, most of still a lot of upstate New York to start the year. Then we see the team head down to Hell, or Mephisto's realm, across that several book arc in kind of the middle, before finally returning to the familiar New York City for the latter half of the year. So we talked, he cracks a safe, so you could put that under powers, though I don't think that's going to actually be something he does on the regular too much longer. As far as new supporting characters, there's not a ton of people here. I think Nyla's probably the one that seems like she's going to be the most important. She's the homeless woman that befriends Matt Murdock while he believes while he doesn't really know who he is and is going by the name Jack Murdock. She seems to be another love interest as we move on.
Friends. That's going to be your euphemism for this week's liaison for Matt Murdock, is it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just sort of whatever.
Whatever.
Yeah. So otherwise, we have Daniel and Vivian, who are the psychologist and his wife from that out of timeline story early in the year. Pope, the boy from Pottersville with the powers to Black Bolt's son. We have the inventor. I'm going to butcher this name, unfortunately. It's Victor Chakowski. Chikowska. I think it's Chikowska.
Sure.
He's an inventor disillusioned by the U.S. and its people, but we're going to talk about that during the spotlight. So that's coming up, and there wasn't any new villains that I really gravitated towards or recognized in the main storyline this year. This week's Spotlight story.
All right, Dwayne, that all sounds good. Now we're going to go back, kind of rewind a little bit to August, and we're going to talk about Daredevil 283, called The American Nightmare. Well, I said early on, I really did like that one story early with the psychologist. This is almost certainly the most interesting story of 1990. And I'm glad you picked this one. So I think there's a lot going on in culture and society and stuff like that in terms of what they're kind of dealing with here. And it's just an interesting story you don't see every day. So tell us a little bit about Daredevil 283.
When I got through the year and thought back to what book did I want to talk about this year for the spotlight, this one jumped out to me because this definitely, like I mentioned earlier, feels like very much a social issues sort of book. There was a lot that this book was trying to tell. I don't know if it necessarily hit the mark on everything, but I think there's a lot here, and it's a very interesting book to dig into. So let's go through and talk about what happens. So this issue begins with a man standing on the roof of a building, draped in an American flag, delivering a passionate speech about the American dream. He then jumps as Captain America and Daredevil look on. So talk about just sort of like hitting you. You think about those movies that start about 3/4 of the way through and give you kind of a gut punch right at the beginning, yep, and then immediately shift back in time. That's exactly what happens here. Because then
36 hours earlier or something.
Yeah, yep. Because then we jump back in time to see both Daredevil and Captain America arriving coincidentally at the same small town in upstate New York. We first see Cap, who's characteristically struggling with a disconnect between American ideals and her reality. So he's like reading the newspaper, doesn't really like what's going on there, and is kind of disgusted by what's going on, what the government's doing, what people are doing in the government's name, and that sort
specifically referencing that he's unhappy about the Panama invasion. In fact, so. Mm-hmm.
So after being disgusted by current events at the newsstand, Rogers runs into Victor Chikowska, an immigrant from an unspecified part of the communist world. I've used those in quotes because they don't get any more specific than that. And it is the man from those opening pages giving that impassioned speech. Mm-hmm. Victor is an inventor whose ideas come to him via lucid dreaming. Okay, whatever that is. And he has built a flying car out of recycled garbage that runs on harmonics. Now, by using harmonic resonance, you can alter matter, he says. Run on garbage, the harmonics will make the car rise. The fact that this makes zero sense scientifically and very little grammatically doesn't seem to matter. The car does, in fact, actually fly, and we do see it fly a little bit, or at least hover, I think, if I remember right. Daredevil follows the unusual sound of Victor's car back to his house because, that's what you do. Cap spots Daredevil and follows him as well because, why not? And upon reaching to his home, Victor has another lucid dream, and upon waking gets in rapid succession threats from immigration, the IRS, and the FBI, the last of which is confronted by Captain America and Daredevil. Meanwhile, news is already airing claiming the flying car is a hoax, and the police are being sent in search of Victor. So you have, in just sort of rapid succession, Captain America and Daredevil meeting this inventor. You see them follow him back to his house. You see him doing more of his lucid dreaming, getting more ideas for his car, presumably. And then suddenly everyone is out to get this immigrant inventor from the government, immigration, IRS, FBI, the police, everybody. And talk about like not trusting the government. There's a microcosm of that right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a deeply cynical story. It's the kind of thing that you were starting to see as the early 90s rolled in, where, essentially the prime idea of this is that all of America's institutions are corrupted by profit and corporations. That essentially big oil does not want a car that runs on garbage. And because of that, all of our American institutions, be they, the immigration department or the FBI or even our media, are corrupted in terms of trying to convince people this doesn't exist and then to destroy it. And so, yeah, it is a very, very cynical. And when it then also references things like Panama and even Cap at the very beginning is already disgusted with sort of the way America's working and the things it's doing. We're going to see a lot of this in the 90s, but this is definitely Nocenti coming out with a very cynical sort of a look at America in 1990.
Yeah.
So it's blatantly clear that Victor's being targeted by the government and its propaganda machine because they're threatened by his invention. The auto oil military industrial complex would never allow a non-polluting cheap fuel car to exist, Cap declares. He and Daredevil then discuss a myriad of problems with America: the wealth gap, racism, the gutting of social programs, and rampant capitalism, to name a few, across like about 2 pages. This wasn't a short sort of like discussion between these two. It kept going. Cap raises the specter of the founding fathers' ideals, and Daredevil comes right back with the genocide of Native Americans. In other words, America was never all that great, is kind of the take-all of that. So while all this discussion is going on, Victor starts another lucid dreaming session again, and we learn from his wife, Nora, that he doesn't have blueprints or schematics to rebuild anything that gets destroyed. So it's like this car, this flying machine on garbage, if it gets destroyed, he's not going to be able to rebuild it, which is exactly what happens because there's some random armed men, presumably hired by the government, that are now in his garage, and they're starting to like wail on it with like bats and metal pipes and all this sort of thing. And our heroes try to stop them, but mostly end up throwing their opponents into the car, which, doesn't really help them keep the car from breaking. So by the time this fight ends, the car is actually just sort of destroyed. And you have Victor comes out. He goes, "Look at the car. It's ruined." And we didn't protect the car is what Steve basically says. It's like, no kidding. The thing is in shambles on the floor of the garage.
Well played, superheroes.
Yeah. So this brings us back to that opening image. In despair over the death of his dream, Victor climbs to the top of the building in town square, draped in the American flag, while a horrified crowd watches. "This is what I think of you, America," he declares, and he jumps. And then flies, because he's built a jetpack at some point, presumably also made of garbage. Hooray. Like, yay, we got this. He's got a new flying contraption. And we see, that's my Victor. He dreams his dreams again. He can fly. That's the man I know and love, Nora declares, as the discarded flag that Victor was holding when he was on the rooftop flutters down into Cap's arms. And Cap says, "And this is the flag I know and love," as the issue ends. Holy cow. This is This is quite the book.
Yeah. The ending doesn't really quite ring entirely true. It's a very upbeat ending considering the way
Yeah.
the story went. I think there's something in there with almost like an allegory of like the American dream and how there's all these people out there trying to destroy the American dream, but in the end Americans are tougher and they will find a way to just keep dreaming and succeed. But I don't know. The whole flag floating down to Captain America thing was just a bit too much for me.
Yeah.
That was laid on with a trowel. So,
The
nonetheless,
thing that struck me about this book, I think first and foremost, is this didn't feel like a Daredevil story so much as it felt like maybe a Captain America story, actually.
well, and really, I mean, it doesn't feel to me like a 616 story. Like,
Okay.
is it really plausible that someone can invent something in their garage, and that a couple guys with bats can do enough damage that Tony Stark or Mister Fantastic cannot figure out how to fix it? Like, is it possible this guy's that much smarter? Plus, you've already got. I mean, really, has Reed Richards not finished or fixed the whole energy problem yet? Or Tony Stark? They've got all this handled. Everybody flies. You know, the Vulture figured out how to fly for heaven's sakes, and he's a moron. The Owl is a moron. So I would almost look at it more like this story, especially since it's outside of New York and everything. It really fits more almost like a Daredevil and Captain America visit the real world type of story. It makes more
Okay.
sense to me that way
Okay.
because they're dealing with a lot of real world problems, and a lot of this stuff, like the whole, build a flying machine thing. It's not that revolutionary in the 616.
No,
It's
I
just kind of like
suppose
a
not.
Fantasticar with stripes on it. But I get the idea nonetheless.
Uh,
And I do think this was a cool story. I liked it a
it,
lot.
it is a cool story. The other thing I'll say about this, the thing that struck out to me is Captain America and Daredevil are pretty useless when it came to actually helping Victor. I mean, Victor is the hero in this story for all intents and purposes, despite the fact
Yeah.
that he's being, targeted by the government and the military and police and everybody. He succeeds in flying despite the fact that, everybody is out to get him, right? And even the heroes that are supposed to potentially help him keep his car from breaking end up breaking the car, and so he's got to go back to the drawing board and figure out a new way to fly instead.
Yeah. Looking at the image, it appears there are 7 guys with like pipe wrenches and hammers,
Uh-huh.
and they can basically take down supervillains, but they can't get rid of this little group of dudes without trashing the entire garage. It's kind of sad, really. So anyway, it's not like they had a bazooka or something. They just literally had a couple of hammers and they destroyed the entire car. So, but this was fun. I think that it was well written in terms of it. It again was an interesting story that we only had about 2 pages of action in this entire book. I think
Yeah.
when they attacked the car was literally the only action we had, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. So this was Mark Bagley doing the art for
Yep.
this, and I thought the art looked great. I mean, I really liked the way Cap looked in this. I really liked the way Daredevil looked in this, and like the car seemed kind of cool as well, and like I thought
Yep.
like the way the setup of the story. I thought the art really did a great job of he's standing there and he looks all sort of patriotic and all this, and then you see him jump, and the horrified look on Cap and Daredevil's face there was, you were just like, it really did feel a little bit like a sucker punch, and then you
Yep.
then you go back in time and figure out what the heck is going on. I liked the art. throughout this, and like I said, the story doesn't make a lot of sense at times, but I still really liked the story throughout all this as well. So it's it's an interesting story. It's just the sort of placement of this story with regards to the larger things that were going on with Daredevil this year that kind of had me puzzled. And I
Well, I
don't
think
know if
a lot of these probably are those stories that are being made as almost like inventory stories, so that when they need, with relatively little work in terms of changing the beginning and the end, you could use this as a fill-in story anytime. So, when you look at the fact that we have lost our regular artist here, and there's a couple other things going on, I think there's a very good chance that this was a story that Nocenti wrote and somebody was behind on their art, so they brought in Bagley to do it. Williamson, of course, is waiting for pages, so they send him those pages and away they go. So probably at some point what happened is Romita Jr. got behind on some of the regular stuff and needed a little bit of time, and so they
I was wondering space. So this was actually before, or this was after the last book John Romita Jr. did. So to me, it almost felt like John Romita Jr. had moved on to something else, and they were trying to find somebody to pick up. And in the interim, they probably had this story that they could just sort of fit in there. And it, because the next books were Lee Weeks jumped in after this story. And so,
yep. And then Capullo and all of that. That makes sense as well. That makes sense that it would be that way too. Yeah. But so it is definitely, though, a couple of the stories this year looked like ones that could be just sort of parachuted in, which was weird because we were in the middle of a long story, 2 long stories really, because it starts with the whole Ultron / Mephisto story going for like half the year, and it ends with the guy who may or may not be Bullseye to end the year. And in between, we get a couple of these actually really cool fill-in stories. I think that a lot of fill-in stories are not great. These are actually really solid. And it does help probably that they're written by Nocenti, so she knows kind of what's going on with the characters there and can find a way of filling in that still maintains sort of the same feel.
Yeah, I think because she's the one that's doing the main stories, the fact that these are kind of different, they still have that same kind of tone that she has for the main story. So it while it's a little out of place, it's not as out of place as it potentially could have been had it been another writer as well.
Yep, I would agree.
All right, so I think that actually kind of wraps up the spotlight for this week. So Dan, why don't we jump into the takeaway for 1990? This week's takeaway. All right, Dan, we've gone through the year 1990. A lot has happened, both in the world in general and in comics. Marvel is the juggernaut that they are. Daredevil had, I think, overall a pretty solid year. What is the takeaway for this year, for 1990?
I think the takeaway to a certain extent is, in 1960-61, Marvel was about ready to close up shop, and Stan Lee was told to write his one last story and close the doors or whatever. And now it is 1990, and Marvel Comics has eaten the comic industry, right? They have gone from essentially publishing 8 stories or 8 comics a month through a distributor that was run by their biggest rival to essentially crushing that rival and everybody else. And now they have half the market. They have most of the hottest characters in comics. They have almost all of the young guns that are going to be the people who are driving sales on comics for the next few years here. And really just over the last few years, we've seen things build and build. We've now got somebody who owns the company, who has the money to sort of do whatever he wants, which means that depending on how they want to go about it, they would have some opportunities to spend some money to make things better. It just seems like the industry as a whole and Marvel are trending up in a way that you really would look at the future and go, man, this is pretty bright. And to be quite frank, for the next few years, we're going to continue looking at that. Like, this is the best year Marvel ever had until next year type of thing, right? But it is interesting that when you achieve this level of dominance, and you achieve it by using as much of the direct market and some of the higher price stuff and the like as they're doing, we're not really seeing Marvel successfully building the next generation of fans so much as just really leaning on the existing fan base. And so, a lot of the stuff that they're doing now is increasingly high price point stuff. DC, the same thing, so it's not like it's just Marvel. But yeah, as of right now, they are selling more comics than anybody else. They're making more titles than anybody else. They've got the hottest creators, and it's a pretty good time to be Marvel. So for now, we enjoy it.
Well, this feels like a situation that feels almost too good to be true, and it does feel like we've talked about the idea of the bubble bursting at some point, and it feels like when you see what has happened in 1990, it feels like there has to be a burst now.
The weird thing is, you don't have to worry about this for a little while. It's going to be a few years of happiness. So just stop worrying and, learn to love the bomb. This is our world right now, is an uninterrupted upward trajectory that will never end.
I can't even imagine what it would have been like to be the guys in the room, right? Or the people in the room that are doing this and seeing all of this kind of come in and seeing this number, the like the chart line just continues to keep going up and up and up and up and up.
No. Well, and it's interesting because we're experiencing that with some other things now. Like Wizards of the Coast has Magic the Gathering. And they've kind of been on that sort of run for the last few years where they just keep making more and more and more money. But they're saturating that market out. And so you do worry how long it's going to go. But nobody worries it at the time. At the time, you're just enjoying it and expecting it will go forever. So we're going to put ourselves into that mindset.
Yeah.
And we're going to expect it to go forever. And we're going to enjoy this right now. So, got another interesting year of Daredevil coming up, too. Because next year, once things settle down a little, by the end of the year, we've got the Last Rites books coming up. And so that's another thing to look forward to. 1991 Daredevil's also pretty good stuff. So, no reason to worry about anything yet. We'll leave that for future Dan and future Dwayne to deal with. So
that sounds good to me. Yeah, definitely looking forward to talking about some more books coming up. That's going to put a wrap on this week's show. We'd like to thank you for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That will help new listeners find the show much easier. Whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts about this week's show. You can send those to us via email at comments@comicsovertime.com or via Twitter or Blue Sky. We're at Comics Over Time there. Until next week, take care, everybody.